when author Brad Meltzer will be our guest. On Book TV, on C-SPAN 2.
In Pennsylvania, Democratic Senator Bob Casey is up for re-election against Republican Congressman Lou Barletta. Voters will decide the race and congressional races across the country in 10 days. The Cook Political Report lists the Pennsylvania Senate election as likely Democrat. The candidates recently had their final campaign debate before Election Day. This is an hour.
Hello and welcome to KDK's debate between the candidates for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. I'm Ken Rice from KDK TV News. I'll be serving as moderator. Let's welcome the candidates. Republican Congressman Lou Barletta of Hazleton, who has served 4 terms in the U.S. House, and the incumbent Democratic Senator Bob Casey of Scranton, running for a 3rd term in the U.S. Senate. I'm joined in questioning the candidates by my KDK TV News colleagues, money and politics editor John Delano, and reporter and talk show host Lynn Hayes Freeland. Here are the rules for our debate. The candidates will have 1 minute for answers and an additional 30 seconds for rebuttal. The questioners may jump in with follow-ups, and we'll make sure the response times are equal. And finally, each candidate will have 90 seconds to deliver a closing statement. And so, gentlemen, let's begin. As we speak right now, there has been an arrest in the series of explosives sent to high-profile Democrats and critics of President Trump. We have nothing official as we speak right now on a motive. Nonetheless, we have all heard from leaders and lawmakers in both parties over the past few days, pointing out that hateful rhetoric inevitably leads to real-life danger, that hate acts follow hate speech. Who do you consider, and Mr. Casey, this goes to you first, who do you consider to be the main source of hate speech in our country right now, and do you have a message for them?
Well, first of all, Ken, I want to say that we're happy that there's a suspect who's been apprehended. We have to make sure as well that not only is that individual prosecuted to the full extent of the law, but anyone else involved, so that we can get to the bottom of this and prevent it from happening again. And that should be, I think, a unifying message for the country. But look, there's no question that in our political culture right now, we have an awful lot of sharp-edged rhetoric, and it happens across the board. I have to say, though, the president, because of what has happened, I hope would take affirmative steps to lead in the direction not just of unifying the country, to be able to get to the bottom of this particular threat. And this is a threat that is domestic terrorism. But I hope the president would lead by example by lessening the negative tone of his rhetoric, and that's true of any public official.
Mr. Barletta.
You know, that shouldn't be tolerated at any place. I mean, we saw what happened on the baseball field of practice when Steve Scalise was shot. And, you know, it's just come to a level, you know, the political discourse in this country has come to a level where people will do anything for power. They'll do anything to get elected. They'll say anything. They'll hurt anybody. And listen, I don't think we can say one person in Washington is responsible. We're all adults. I don't think the president needs to lecture us on how we should act. We should be responsible for ourselves and what we say, and realize that they all have consequences. And let's not start pointing fingers even when we're trying to really calm everything down.
Fair enough. Next question, John Delano for Lou Barletta.
Mr. Barletta, after dozens of attempts to repeal Obamacare, which protects those with pre-existing medical conditions, Republicans are now claiming that they never really meant to deny insurance coverage or to raise premiums for those with cancer and the like. Now, this is personal to a lot of folks, as it is to you and to me. My wife is a breast cancer survivor. Rather than focus on what you may or may not have done in the past, can you pledge tonight that if you are elected to the United States Senate, you will never vote to repeal Obamacare with these protections or support any bill that would deny health insurance or raise premiums for anyone with pre-existing conditions?
Sure, I can easily say that, John, because I already did that. When we repealed Obamacare, the next day I signed a resolution that would say that the committees that are responsible for replacing Obamacare would make sure we take care of people with pre-existing conditions. The replacement model that we passed was very clear in law. that you cannot deny people with pre-existing conditions, you cannot raise their premiums, and you cannot throw them off. That covered 93%. The 7% who did let their insurance lapse that were not covered, we made sure that went back to the state when they went to buy insurance, that we had a pot of money, a high-risk pool, that would cover those folks that did the exact same thing. So I don't think there's anybody in Washington that wants to deny anyone with pre-existing conditions. It's a good political argument, and I see my opponent has taken much advantage of it in scaring people who are sick. Yes, I will pledge that I would never support anything that doesn't cover people with pre-existing conditions.
Mr. Casey, same question.
John, there's no question I would make that pledge. I've already voted consistent with that pledge. But here's what we're talking about here. We're talking about 5.3 million people in Pennsylvania that have a pre-existing condition. Virtually any room you walk into is probably 40% of the people in the room. This is real life for so many families. We have to make sure that the law of the land, which it is now, it wasn't before the Affordable Care Act, where insurance companies could discriminate by way of coverage and deny you coverage, but also they could discriminate by charging you higher rates. The law of the land now is that pre-existing conditions protections are in place. There should be no effort by any public official to take that away. Unfortunately, the congressman has at least 7 votes that would deny people these kinds of protections. Probably the most well-known, the most egregious was the House-passed bill in 2017, which very clearly weakened protections on pre-existing conditions. I hope that he would pledge again not to ever do that.
Mr. Barletta, you may respond.
You know, obviously, if we want to continue scaring people who have pre-existing conditions, I know personally how offensive that is when a politician will do anything to get elected. Nobody's going to deny anybody with pre-existing conditions, but maybe we should talk about why we had to replace Obamacare in the first place. The fact that our premiums went up to 114%, our deductibles, our out-of-pocket costs are so high that people aren't even going to the doctors anymore. How about all the millions of people who have been hurt by Obamacare, and that's why we're trying to replace it in the first place?
Mr. Casey, you get the last word on this one.
Well, first of all, the Affordable Care Act, in terms of Pennsylvania, made sure that 1.1 million people have coverage. That's a good thing, Congressman, for both parties in the whole state. When the guy next to you has health insurance, well, you're better off. I'd also say that there's no question now that we have better protections because of the Affordable Care Act. That applies to anyone with insurance. I think it was an advancement. We can't go back to the dark days when an insurance company had the power to deny you treatment coverage or charge you a higher rate.
Next question goes to Lynn Hayes-Freeland.
And my question is directed to you, Mr. Casey. Amazon recently announced plans to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour effective November the 1st. That's 2 times the federal minimum wage, which has not been increased in the past 9 years. Mr. Casey, do you believe that all workers deserve to earn at least a living wage of $15 an hour? And if so, how do you balance that with the pushback from employers who say they can't afford it and they may have to lay off workers if they're forced into the increase?
Lynn, your question points to a key issue for voters in this election, and that's the question of wages. Who is going to be on your side to take affirmative steps to lift wages? When it comes to the minimum wage, I have a long record of supporting increase in the minimum wage, but it's been far too long in the intervening time period when we raised it last at the federal level, back to 2007. I voted already, or supported already, I should say, legislation that would bring the minimum wage up to at least $12. I think we should also make sure that 2 things happen. One, that inflation is taken into account in the future so that wage can continue to keep up with inflation, and that if a local community wants to go to $15 or even higher, that local communities should have that opportunity. It's one of the fastest ways to raise wages, and it's very good for children when their mom or their dad has an increase in their wages.
Mr. Barletta.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree with a modest increase of the minimum wage. However, the best way to raise wages is to grow the economy. It was exactly what we're doing now. The fact that competition for employees is what really drives wages up, and government interference with the economy and trying to go back to a stagnant economy that saw people, their hours cut and their wages cut, and layoffs coming. Right now, we have one of the greatest economies that we've ever seen in our lifetime. And the fact that there's a competition, there are actually more jobs than there are people who are unemployed. And that's what drives wages. When you want to get the economy going and wages, you grow the economy, and that's what's going to raise wages, not government artificially raising wages to $15 an hour that will actually cost people their jobs.
Let me just follow up, because you said a modest increase. So do you believe that $10 an hour is a living wage? Because, for example, calculations indicate that you both make about $84 an hour.
You know, I wouldn't put a dollar figure on that today. I think the economy, let's see what the economy is doing. Amazon raised those wages to $15 on their own. You know, so if we put a $10 an hour tag on what wages should be, maybe Amazon would have only paid those folks $10 an hour instead of $15. Let's let the market determine what the wages are. They did that on their own without government interference.
Mr. Casey.
Just in terms of some history here, when the new administration took over in January of 2017, they inherited a growing economy, growing at a very fast clip, taking what was the worst downturn since the 1930s and turning it into a growing economy. I'm glad it's still growing. I'm glad the unemployment rate is low. But I think here's the other thing we should do, coupling with an increase in the minimum wage. We should come together in a bipartisan way and give the middle class a substantial tax cut, paid for by the top 1%. The top 1% in the legislation that the congressman voted for are getting 83% of the benefits. That's wrong. Those boosts in pay by way of a tax cut should go to the middle class. So I think we should come together, give the middle class a
Time
real
is up,
boost.
Senator.
Hope the congressman would join me.
And Mr. Barletta, final word?
It's amazing. Coming off an administration that grew the economy at 2.2%. We're now, I guess today it was 3.5% is the new GDP numbers. We were up at 4.2%. The fact that 4 million new jobs were created because of the tax cuts and rolling back regulations, somehow, I don't know what policy it is that Senator Casey's talking about that waited 8 years to actually come alive. I think the reason the economy took off is because they were out of power, and small business confidence and consumer confidence went through the roof because of that. The economy is growing because of the tax cuts and the rollback of regulations, and that's what's driving it. They don't understand how to get the economy going.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about the economy, because frankly, voters' impressions of which party deserves the credit for the good economy, that can be a deciding factor in this upcoming election. So we have President Trump claiming all the credit for the current economy. President Obama has come out very forcefully and said, no, it's all the result of his policies. Mr. Barletta, because this matters, what is the truth? And please back it up with specifics.
Well, I'd like Senator Casey to tell us what exact policy it was in their administration that is responsible for this. Was it the more regulations? Was it Obamacare? What was it that they did? Higher taxes? I can't find what policy would be. Well, the fact of the matter is the economy took off when we rolled back taxes. We allowed businesses to grow. We gave them some more of their own money. They invested it. They hired more people. We rolled back regulations so that businesses can actually compete here in the United States once again. Because of this administration, because of our policies, the United States has once again become the most competitive country in the world. And businesses are moving back here. We now have a shortage of employees, and I don't know what policy it was in 8 years that could have caused that hibernated for 8 years, and then all of a sudden showed its head when our administration came into power.
And here are the facts. We all remember where we were in the last quarter of 2008, where the growth rate, if you can even use the word growth, was minus 8.9%, almost 9% negative. By the time President Obama left office, it was in the positive by 1.8%. So he and Democrats turned around an economy which was definitively in the ditch, number one, on growth. Number two, the unemployment rate in his first year got as high as 10%. The month he left office was about 4.8%. Now we're below 4%, and that's good. But so this idea that somehow the magic was created starting in January of 2017 is a big lie, and everyone knows it. We're all glad when the economy grows. But the congressman and his party didn't lift a finger to grow the economy in those years. In fact, most Republicans were either voting against the Recovery Act or arguing against the Recovery Act. They did nothing to grow the economy. Democrats did the job. We want to keep doing the job to grow the economy. The best way to do that
Time's up.
is to give the middle class a tax cut.
Mr. Barletta, you can rebut.
So I didn't hear what policy it was that waited 8 years to create this economy that's soaring right now. I didn't hear it. I do remember President Obama saying 2% growth, get used to it. That's the new norm. And what's this next president going to do? Wave a magic wand? Well, he must have a magic wand, because we are in the middle of the greatest economy in our lifetime.
Mr. Casey, final word on this.
I'll let it go. Go ahead.
Is there a specific policy you'd like to point to and take up Mr. Barletta on that challenge?
A specific what?
A specific Democratic Obama policy that your party might claim as the real reason the economy is doing so well today?
Despite the denigration from Republican politicians in Washington who genuflect every day to the big corporate special interests, the Recovery Act is the reason we began to recover years ago, had the longest period of growth in the history of the country. So we got the economy out of the ditch. What they did when they took over is, you know what they did? They do what they always do. They try to cut programs like Medicare and Medicaid, and then they give a tax cut for major corporations. They gave $2 trillion in permanent tax relief, jacking up the debt for the American people, and they gave away the store to the top 1%.
All right, Mr. Barletta.
Same playbook. They cut programs for people, and they give the rich and big corporations. Go ahead, see if you can talk about that.
Mr. Barletta, I'll let you respond.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about the $718 billion that was taken out of Medicare. You want to talk about hurting Medicare?
Not true.
$718 billion was raided out of Medicare to pay for Obamacare. $718 billion. You want to talk about who's hurting Medicare?
Let me.
I'll give you 10 seconds, and I want to follow up. Go ahead.
Medicare benefits were not cut in the Affordable Care Act. Why would the AARP support the Affordable Care Act if it cut Medicare? That's a lie, and he knows it.
Mr. Barletta, do you agree with the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, who said that the stock market is the administration's scorecard? Do you agree with it now after we've seen quite a decline? The Dow has closed down for 5 straight weeks.
I think it's part of it. Obviously, it's part of the scorecard. I think the fact that we have more people in the workforce now than ever before. I think the fact that African American unemployment's at an all-time low, Hispanic unemployment's at an all-time low.
But the question is, if you can claim credit for a strong stock market, do you also have to take blame when it's not doing so well?
Well, let's make believe that this administration and the Republicans weren't in charge at all. You know what that means? That means the stock market goes down by 20%. Since this administration is in office, the stock market is up over 20% overall. That's pretty good for people that have 401ks. Let's take it from the beginning of where we were and where we are now.
Mr. Case, I'll let you weigh in and then we'll move on.
Yeah, we're always happy. If someone's 401k is up, that's great. If unemployment keeps going down, that's wonderful. We all support that. Here's the problem. Costs have not gone down. The cost of child care is too high that we have to get down. The cost of health care, I wish they would join us instead of trying to repeal protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Let's get the cost of health care down. Let's work together to get the cost of prescription drugs down. That's why my importation bill would begin to solve that problem. Right. And also, let's do our best to help families save for college and retirement.
Thank you. John Delano, next question. No, we need to move on. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Casey, we've all seen Mr. Barletta's ad, presumably photoshopped, showing you asleep on the job and suggesting that you are one of the least effective senators on Capitol Hill. Now, you've been in the Senate for 12 years, but when you go out on the street and talk to people and ask them, what has Senator Casey done, they blank. What is it? Is that a fair measure of your performance in the Senate? Or is there something specific that you can point to that you're most proud of that most of us in Pennsylvania may not be aware of?
Well, John, first of all, the ad, of course, is not fair, but I'm glad I have some equal time here. Number one is, if you measure someone's work as a legislator by bills enacted into law, since this term of my time in the Senate began, we're getting close to 50 bills that have been enacted into law. The ones that will have the most impact, I think, on people's lives here in Pennsylvania and around the country would be first the ABLE Act, which for the first time allowed families that have a loved one with a disability to save in a tax-advantaged way, just like it's saved for college, almost like a 529 plan for disabilities. It gives families great peace of mind. That will have national impact for generations. The second bill that I'm very proud of that was bipartisan was making sure that on college campuses we have more protections in place for young women who could be the victims of sexual assault. That is the law of the land starting, it was implemented in the fall of 15, so we have 4 years now of that bill being in place. I'm very proud of a bipartisan record, and I look forward to talking about it more.
That adds, Mr. Casey, is just plain wrong?
Sure it is, but I would expect that.
Mr. Barletta.
So if we look at the report card, we need to really compare Senator Casey's record with our other senators that we've had. And Senator Toomey, who's there 4 less years, has 50% more bills passed. Senator Santorum had double the amount of bills passed than Senator Casey. Senator Specter had 30 bills passed. Senator Hines had 26 bills passed. Our Senator Casey had 4. In fact, his report card is so bad that he was voted one of the least effective senators in Congress, not once, but twice. And as far as the ABLE Act, which I co-sponsored, it's amazing that you wouldn't have supported our bill that would have allowed another $12,000 on top of the $15,000 limit that could be saved, that you would not support a bill that actually put another $12,000 on it, that you voted against that. You voted against your own bill. That's amazing.
Mr. Casey.
Well, first of all, I'd be interested to see those numbers on other senators. The fact of the matter is I have at least 45 bills in this term that have been enacted into law. Bills that have far-reaching effect on people's lives, bills that are bipartisan. I'd ask the congressman to weigh just between the two of us, and since the new administration, he's very close to the administration. He claims to work with them on a number of fronts. But here we have legislation that I have passed that President Trump has signed into law. My grandfamily's bill to help grandparents who are raising a child because of the opioid crisis. That online tool
Quickly, please.
is now the law of the land. Secondly, the career and technical education bill that I did with Mike Enzi of Wyoming, that's signed into law. So if it's just bills signed into law in the recent past by President Trump, I'll win that battle.
Yeah, I'm going to come back. Mr. Barletta, can you respond to the question of what you have done as a lawmaker?
Sure. First of all, I've saved $4.4 billion using my experience in a private sector in shrinking the federal footprint of the federal government. $4.4 billion and growing. I had 2 opioid bills that were passed. I have, I think the most proudest thing that I did wasn't actually a bill. It was a little girl called Sarah Murnahan who had cystic fibrosis, and the government was going to deny that little girl a lung transplant because she was 10 years old and not 12. And I actually got involved and helped raise this question. But if I think I just have to say the career tech education bill that he's talking about taking credit for, it started in the House. It was G.T. Thompson's bill. In fact, I got language in it before you even saw it. So I'm glad you signed on to our bill. Thank you.
All right, next question, Lynn Hayes Freeland for Mr. Barletta.
Mr. Barletta, from Florida to Georgia, we've seen new voting restrictions put into place that many are interpreting as voter suppression, often aimed at African American voters. In 2012, a proposed Pennsylvania voter ID requirement, which some top Republicans admitted was designed to suppress Democratic votes, was ruled unconstitutional. With little to no actual evidence of fraud, why is the Republican Party so worried about voter fraud?
Well, I think there's a lot of focus in Washington about making sure we're protecting our elections, with all the focus on the Russians' involvement in the last election. I would think that it would be natural that we would also say, let's make sure that right here at home there's no voter fraud. And that just seems to me to be reasonable, that we're protecting, because there is a lot of focus about interference in our elections until it comes to at home, where we say, well, let's not be too careful about whether somebody can vote or not. I think we need to make sure that we protect our elections, whether it's from foreign countries interference or whether it's from fraud right here on our homeland.
But here in Pennsylvania in 2016, there were only 3 reported cases of voter fraud.
There should be no voter fraud. I think we should all be able to go to the polls and know that on election night that there cannot be anyone, whether it's from a foreign country. I mean, we spent a lot of time on Russians' interference with our election, but yet when it comes to right here at home, we want to be a little less stringent. I think we should protect the dignity of our election process, whether it's from abroad or it's right here at home.
Mr. Casey, your take?
Then let's be blunt about it. There's no voter fraud problem in the United States of America, okay? Republican politicians want to use this as a tool to, I guess, please some interest group out there that thinks that there is. The evidence is very clear and it's irrefutable. We don't have a voter fraud problem. What we should do is come together, and I hope the congressman would support this, and support in a bipartisan fashion legislation introduced in the House and the Senate to say if we have to update the Voting Rights Act and provide corrections that are the result of a Supreme Court case from a couple years ago, the Shelby County case, we should come together and do that to make sure that voting rights are protected. We had this fight. We had this fight over generations. People bled and died for the right to vote. It culminated in the Voting Rights Act in the mid-'60s. We should make sure that those protections are in place. I would hope that he would call the Department of Justice and say, enforce the law with regard to voting rights, make sure more people can vote. I would not want to be part of a political party that wanted to shrink the number of voters.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Casey, President Trump says there are scientists on both sides of the issue of global warming and whether human activity is causing it. The president says that the climate changes back and forth, and therefore he's not about to sacrifice our economy for something that nobody really knows. Do you know for sure, Senator, that climate change is real, caused by man, and that this isn't all a conspiracy to fool people?
And I think the evidence is overwhelming across the world that climate change is real, that it does pose a threat to human life itself, and secondly, that it's caused by man. We can take actions to push back against this. We're up against a time limit, I think. We're coming, I'm not sure what year, but there's a time limit. We've got to make sure we put in place measures to do that. 2 things that this administration did, which is in contravention of that. Number 1, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords so that we can't be part of a consensus around the world to take action against climate change. And second, to make sure that we put in place the Clean Power Plan, which would help us deal with our own challenges here. This challenge is a worldwide challenge, but I think here at home we've got to lead, and we've got to make sure that we're reducing emissions here in a manner that will push back against the darkness of climate change. This is a mission worthy of a great country. We can do this.
Mr. Barletta, just to look at the other side of this, let me reframe it. The National Climate Assessment is a scientific report reviewed by 13 federal agencies and actually approved by the Trump White House. And that assessment says that long-term global warming, that trend is clear, and that there is no convincing evidence that it's merely natural variability, as the president has suggested. Why do some politicians, like you, I believe, substitute your judgment for that of the top scientists that much of the government puts stock in?
We spend a lot of time trying to find what we believe an argument of whether it's man-made, whether it's cyclical, and we spend a heck of a lot of time doing that. I agree that there is climate change. Whether it's man-made or it's not, we have climate change. So therefore, let's do what we can on the man-made side to make sure that we're not contributing to affecting our planet. And the United States does a good job of it. When we overregulate, though, here in the United States, we push these companies into countries like China, where the regulations are less, and they get to pollute even more. We do more harm to our planet by over-regulating American companies, trying to do our share and their share, and we actually push companies out into another country where they could pollute even more. We should be doing the opposite, which we are. Let's bring these companies back here where we have fair regulations. Hard to be a senator and be out here in Western PA and be against coal and be against natural gas, which is just amazing to me. When natural gas is one of the cleanest forms of energy we can have, we have a a Pennsylvania
Time is up,
senator
sir.
that's against both.
Senator?
We just made that up. That's not true. Number one. Number two is there's no question that when it comes to this issue, we have to take action. At the same time, and I'll be critical of my own party here, at the same time, we need, right alongside that, a substantial jobs program to make sure that if someone loses their job because of actions we take on climate change, that we try to get them a job, we give them the training, we invest in those workers. That's what we should do as a country. We can do both. We're Americans. We can figure this out. The idea that you have to choose jobs versus dealing with climate change is just a political argument only in Washington.
Mr. Barletta, final word on this.
So to go back to natural gas, which is these are family-sustaining jobs right here. People, our communities out here are depending on that. Our senator led the charge. He didn't just join it. He led the charge to put federal regulations on top of already state regulations to put the gas companies out of business. Right here in Western PA. Not only those families are depending on those jobs, but these communities are depending on those jobs. We already said he hates coal. He wants to put the coal companies out of business. Now he wants to put the natural gas companies out of business, which would devastate Western PA and all of Pennsylvania.
Got to leave it there. We are going to take a break. We will continue with more of our KDK U.S. Senate debate right after this. Welcome back to KDK's debate between the candidates for U.S. Senate, Republican Lou Barletta and Democrat Bob Casey. The next question goes to my colleague John Delano. John.
Mr. Barletta, you made your mark as mayor of Hazleton opposing illegal immigration in your community. Now, during one of my interviews with you, you defended the president's policy of separating children from their parents at the border, saying it was a good deterrent to illegal border crossing. As we speak, thousands of Central Americans, many women and children, are heading toward our border. Is this a humanitarian crisis or a law enforcement issue? Do you still support separating children from their parents? What should be the appropriate response of the U.S. government?
I think we can all agree nobody wants to see what we saw down at the border with children and parents being separated. So the best way to stop that is not to let it happen in the first place, which this is a failure of Washington. I was a mayor that actually had to stand up before anyone else in the country to try to do something about illegal immigration because Washington wouldn't do anything. And what we're seeing, the caravan, this invasion that we're seeing right now, that's growing every day, if you don't like those pictures, and the Democrats and Senator Casey and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi get back in, you better get used to it. Because you know why that's happening? It's happening because Senator Casey voted for a bill called Catch and Release that literally tells people how to get into the United States illegally and then stay. And now we have an increase at the border, caravans of people coming in because not only do they tell them how to get here with catch and release, then he supports sanctuary cities to say once you get into the country illegally, we're going to protect you in sanctuary cities. We'll see sanctuary states. So if you think Philadelphia...
Time is up.
Well, let me just follow up quickly, and then we'll go to Mr. Casey. Do you still support separating children from their parents once they get into the US?
I think when we saw what happened, because the amount of people that are now charging the border, nobody wants to see that. I think family centers where we can keep them together, process them quicker so that we don't have to. They can only hold them for 20 days. It's called the Flores Agreement, and that's the reason that happens. And we can't process their cases fast enough.
Mr. Casey.
John, what you just heard is a Washington politician who's had 8 years in the majority in the House, and they've done nothing on immigration because they don't want to solve the problem. They want to use this issue to divide people, and they've been pretty effective at using it to divide people. What we should do on all these issues, whether it comes to people coming to our border, whether it's about the immigration issue itself, is solve the problem. The good news is there's a template. It would probably have to be adjusted, but the 2013 legislation, which was comprehensive, supported by 68 United States senators, it died in the House because they wouldn't take it up. That legislation, for the first time, would secure the border with more than $40 billion, doubling of the Border Patrol, using technology to actually secure the border with the kind of expertise, not what Republican politicians talk about. It would have had a pathway to citizenship for people who are employed and learn English. It would have begun to solve the problem. That was 5 years ago. We would be on the path to solving this problem, dealing with all these issues if Republican politicians didn't do what they did. Their plan is
Time's up.
They want to deport 11 million people. That's his plan.
Mr. Barletta.
Senator, you're not part of the problem with illegal immigration. You are the problem. That's amazing that you're talking about a bill 4 years ago when you just voted this year no to the Grassley bill that would have secured the border and gave legalization to 1.8 million DACA recipients. That was this year. You support Kate's law. You don't even want to deport people who are criminal aliens. You voted against that. You voted against that. You support sanctuary cities. You support catch and release. And you just this year, why don't you talk about
Time's
this
up.
year, why you voted no to that bill?
Mr. Casey, you have the last word on this.
We had legislation, John, that was supported by virtually every Democrat in the Senate and 8 Republicans who stuck their neck out to support a bill that would have provided border security money to the tune of $25 billion and would have fixed the DACA program. But the congressman and his party stopped that. So we don't have the DACA problem solved to keep the promise to young people. We don't have the border secured in the manner that we would like. And the immigration system is still a broken system. Their plan is simple. They want to deport 11 million people and separate kids at the border. That is not only inhumane, it is flawed. It'll make us less safe.
Next question goes to Lynn Hayes Freeland.
Mr. Casey, a few days ago, President Trump said a Republican Congress would enact a 10% tax cut for middle-class families before Election Day. Of course, that was impossible because Congress has recessed for the election. But given the record deficit, $779 billion in deficit spending during Trump's first year, is this really a time for tax cuts?
Well, first and foremost, I think the president, when he talked about how it would get done, obviously was wrong on procedure. We would have to have a period of time either after the election or early next year to debate a new tax policy. What I would hope we would do, though, is come together and provide a substantial middle-class tax cut and pay for that with existing revenue that's being given right now to the top 1%. The top 1% this year alone is getting $58 billion. So if you're making more than $730,000 a year, you're in the top 1%. I think we could use those dollars to target a substantial middle-class tax cut to help them with those costs. The cost of childcare, the cost of health care, the cost of prescription drugs, helping to save for college. Give the middle class a substantial tax cut. I think that would be bipartisan. The other thing we should try to do as well is go back into the 2017 bill and focus on using the tax code to invest in infrastructure. We can talk more about it.
Mr. Barletta.
Sure, I heard the senator mention child care, the cost of child care twice now so far. And yet when he had an opportunity to help those folks by increasing the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000, doubling it, he voted no. Wages have gone up 2.7%. Here in Pennsylvania, the average median wage went up $1,853. That's a lot of money, Senator. That's not crumbs, as your friend Nancy Pelosi would say. That's a lot of money. Even PPL gave the people back home here in Pennsylvania a rebate because of our tax cuts. I don't think you understand the economy because you haven't been out of Washington. You've been here too long, and you don't understand what it's like to sign the front of a check and know what it takes to get the economy going. You voted against a child tax credit that would double the amount for the folks that you're talking about.
We've both been in Congress now 8 years together, so you've been there a while yourself. But here's what we should do. We should do what we did this year. It was actually in a bipartisan way. I'll give the Republicans some credit here. We came together and supported a bill, a spending bill for the years that made long overdue investments in medical research, in health care, and education. And it was bipartisan. One of the increases was $2.4 billion for child care block grants. That means that in Pennsylvania, 10,131 was the estimate. Children in Pennsylvania will have child care today because those block grants were expanded. That's a good thing. We should do more than that.
Mr. Barletta, final word?
Yeah, again, the Democrat talking points that, let's tax the top business owners more money, doesn't understand how to get the economy going. So the more taxes, that's why businesses were leaving the United States, because we had the highest corporate tax rates in the world. They're coming back in here creating jobs. Why do you think jobs are being created? You know, you can't say you like eggs but want to kill the chicken. So don't tell us that you like jobs but you want to kill business, because that's what your policies do. Over-regulate, over-tax, and away they go. There goes our jobs.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on. Mr. Barletta, your opponent says that to reduce the likelihood of future mass shootings in this country, it's just common sense, he says, to ban assault weapons, ban high-capacity magazines, and expand background checks on gun buyers. Which of those do you disagree with, and why?
So I don't think, I don't think that we should have any automatic weapons on the streets in America. I don't believe we should have any automatic weapons on our streets in America. I don't believe that people who should not have guns can get guns. I believe people with mental health issues should not be able to get their hands on weapons. I believe that we need to tighten up our reporting so that what we saw in some of these shootings was information that fell through the cracks, where that we had something in place, but it just fell through the cracks. I don't think we should have bump stocks, but I still think we are a country of the Second Amendment, and at the same time, we should not punish law-abiding Americans, especially here in Pennsylvania, where we have hunters that abide by our Second Amendment. We shouldn't infringe on their Second Amendment rights, but at the same time, we can and should make sure that these weapons don't get in the hands of people who should not have them.
Let me just pin you down before I move on to Mr. Casey. So he talks about banning assault weapons. Not you mentioned automatic weapons. So assault weapons bans would be semi-automatic rifles, like an AR-15.
So a semi-automatic weapon can also be a handgun with a detachable magazine.
But do you support?
So what I'm saying is, how do you define an assault weapon that doesn't infringe on the rights of law-abiding Second Amendment Americans?
Would you disagree with a new assault weapons ban similar to the one that was enacted under the Clinton administration?
Well, again,
It's a yes or no question. Well, would you like to see that assault weapons ban return? Military style,
what an assault weapon is to me before I could tell you. If you're talking about handguns with a detachable magazine, which is an assault weapon, then my answer is no. I'm not going to infringe on the rights of our Second Amendment rights on law-abiding citizens.
Would you ban high-capacity magazines so that a shooter doesn't have to change the magazines?
Bump stocks. Yeah, absolutely.
No, not bump stocks. I'm talking about clips that can hold a large amount of ammunition. That means you can keep shooting longer without having to reload.
I would ban automatic weapons. I wouldn't go any further.
Aren't automatic weapons already banned?
What's that?
Automatic weapons are largely already banned, are they not?
I believe we should continue to make sure that they're not on the streets of America.
Would you expand background checks on gun buyers in any way?
I would make sure that our background checks are shared and that expand.
Expand.
Are you talking about a registry?
Beyond what's currently legislated. Expand to cover gun sales at gun shows or online, similar to the Manchin-Toomey bill.
You're talking about the Manchin-Toomey bill.
Yes.
To be specific, that bill, I believe, is good. However, we need to make sure that it does not lead to a registry of guns. And if it did that, then I could be supportive of it.
Okay.
But I want to make sure it would not lead to a registry of guns.
Mr. Casey, now, a different situation for you. Pennsylvanians who enjoy owning and shooting guns like the AR-15 and other semi-automatic rifles, they can't count on you anymore to defend their right to have such weapons. Your position on that changed after you were last elected. So how do you respond to those who say that you lied about your views on the Second Amendment when you were a candidate last time, and that you revealed that your allegiance is to anti-gun lobbyists and Washington liberals?
Well, Ken, I don't think that's a fair assessment. I was in the United States Senate for a term before the Sandy Hook Elementary School Newtown shooting, the massacre there. And frankly, in my first term in the Senate, there weren't gun votes like we had in my second term. And you have to make a decision how you're going to vote. I had to make a decision initially on 3 votes. The background check bill you talked about, the limitation on the magazine, so one individual can't shoot hundreds of bullets at one time, especially at school children. And third, the ban on the military-style weapon. I voted yes on all three of those. They are common sense measures, totally consistent with the Second Amendment, which we do have a strong tradition in our state. People want guns for protection, but also for hunting and fishing. Law-abiding gun owners are not impacted in any way by those three bills. Only a Washington politician would make that argument. We need common sense gun measures in place, and on background checks, it's probably a 90% support across the country.
Would you tell Mr. Barletta exactly what type of assault weapon you would ban? How do you define that?
Well, I would. It'd be the measures that were in the bill that I voted for in 2013. I don't have them in front of me, but that bill I supported, and that bill I think is the kind of legislation we can enact to at least reduce the likelihood of another mass shooting.
Can you tell him what type of weapons you would ban?
All I can say is that whatever is covered in the 2013 bill.
All right, Mr. Barletta, you can rebut.
All I'm going to say is that I would not infringe on the Second Amendment rights of the American people who are law-abiding. You know, we need to obviously keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, and that's what we need to focus on, not make another law. Listen, I was a mayor. Bad people get guns. They don't go to gun shops. Bad people can get guns from gangs. All we're going to do, if we start infringing on law-abiding citizens, we're going to force people to buy guns from drug dealers and gang members, and they're still going to get a gun.
Final word, Mr. Casey.
It's not, in no way were those three measures infringe upon law-abiding gun owners. That's a red herring. I know it's a good way to divide people. He and his party are good at that, but it's a typical Washington politician talking about how to solve a problem. Are we just going to surrender to this problem as a country and say there's nothing we can do about it? That's not American. We can solve this problem. I'm not saying we can eliminate it completely, but we could substantially reduce the likelihood of another Newtown or another Parkland. We should move in that direction, totally consistent with the Second Amendment.
Moving on, John Delano, you're up.
There's no question that whichever one of you is elected, over the next 6 years, you will be called upon to make confirmation, advising consent with respect to justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. Mr. Casey, last July, even before President Trump named Judge Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court, you announced that you would oppose any nominee the president made to that court. Is that the rule now? How can you announce opposition to a candidate before you even know who that candidate is? Are there no nominees to the Supreme Court the president could make that would get your support?
John, we're in a new world now, where the United States Supreme Court, the two justices who have been confirmed, were chosen by two groups, the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, two extreme right organizations. The president told us that pretty early in his administration, that he would only choose from 25 names. John, you know there are hundreds of conservative, Republican-appointed federal judges in the country. Appellate court judges who could serve on the court, district court judges who could serve, and even state Supreme Court justices like Sandra Day O'Connor. She came from the Arizona Supreme Court. So there are hundreds of judges to choose from, but they're all disqualified. Those conservative Republican judges are disqualified because they don't have the imprimatur of two extreme right groups. The Heritage Foundation refers to unions as cartels. I don't want the Heritage Foundation picking a Supreme Court if I'm representing Pennsylvania. I stand by that. We have to have a different system.
Time.
Two things should happen. The president should say,
Time's up.
Picking from a list beyond 25, and we should have 60 votes for every Supreme Court justice.
Mr. Barletta, let me just give you a little twist on this. Democrats say that you're just a rubber stamp for President Trump. You will confirm any nominee that he submits to you for the U.S. Supreme Court. Is that true? And if not, what kind of Trump nominee would you oppose?
No, obviously, the American Bar Association said that Justice Kavanaugh was more than qualified. So the Senate's responsibility is to advise and consent. And what list did President Obama pick from? We don't know because it wasn't transparent. We don't know what list. And you know what's amazing about this? This may be the biggest example in the country of resistance, obstruction, stop anything that this president's doing. That list that bothers you so badly, that is so far right, you actually supported 3 judges who were on that list. You voted for 3 judges on that list. Our own Tom Hardiman was on that list, and you said, I'll vote no. Judge Hardiman didn't move far right, Senator. It's just that you have moved so far left, he looks like he's farther right.
Mr. Casey.
John, it's very simple what's happened here. You have a process that is rigged by special interest corporations or special interest corporate agenda. What they're doing is saying that only those 25 can be chosen, and this is the person who will be the deciding vote on a lot of major issues, including the right to organize for unions. They're coming for the right to organize. They started down that path with the Janus case, which invalidated 40 years of labor law. They're coming for unions. They're coming for working folks. We cannot allow the Supreme Court to be taken over by corporate special interests. Unfortunately, we're probably too late.
Mr. Barletta, you get the last word on this.
Let me repeat. He voted for 3 that were already on that list.
Those 3 were not upon confirmation of the Supreme Court. It's a little different when you're voting for a district court judge. I'll say this as well. Senator Toomey and I have come together where he supports judges I recommend at the district court level. I've supported his. I've supported plenty of conservative district court judges, but they're not extreme right. They're not ideologues. As soon as this administration and this Senate goes to the appellate level, it has to be far right, and it has to be someone endorsed by those groups. I'd even want to take a look at a list put together by the Chamber of Commerce, God help us. The Chamber of Commerce looks like a moderate group compared to these extreme right organizations.
Mr. Barletta, you do have the right to the last word.
Yeah, sure. Advise and consent. That's the Senate's responsibility. That's your responsibility, to give those folks at least a chance to be in front of you so that you can advise and consent. To just say, I don't care who it is, I'm voting no, just shows that you have become a leader in this country in resistance, obstruction. It's no. The only reason it's no, it's because of who it came from. You supported 3 of them before, and all of a sudden they're no good.
Gentlemen, thank you. We have come to the time for you to deliver your closing statements. The order of our candidate closing statements was determined earlier by coin toss. Mr. Barletta, you go first, and you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. You know, Senator Casey, 12 years ago when he was first elected senator, he said that he was for the working people. And now he votes for natural gas jobs, coal jobs, the kind of jobs that we have here in Pennsylvania. He told us that he was pro-life. Now he's not. He told us that he would protect our Second Amendment rights. Now he doesn't. He went to Washington and he forgot about Pennsylvania. Those 12 years in Washington, he has taken $9 million from lobbyists and lawyers. He's taken $2 million from drug companies and insurance companies. He's even taken $70,000 from opioid manufacturers. He supports sanctuary cities. He's for open borders. Now he wants to stop the greatest economy that we've ever seen in our lifetime. You know why? All because he doesn't like this president. Listen, I'm going to keep this economy going. I'm going to make sure we take care of our veterans. I'm going to make sure we give our military what they need. I'm going to show respect for law enforcement once again. We're going to take care of our senior citizens. I'm going to secure the borders, put an end to illegal immigration once and for all, stop sanctuary cities, and I promise the Pennsylvania voters this is what I won't do. I will never, never expose the people of Pennsylvania to negative, dirty ads just to get elected, because the people of Pennsylvania deserve much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barletta. Mr. Casey.
And I want to thank you and John and Lynn, and I also want to thank KDK for this opportunity. Look, this election creates a very clear choice. So much is at stake in this election for the middle class, for seniors, for our children, and especially for workers threatened by policies by the Republican Congress and this administration. Just think about health care. We have a basic disagreement here. I have voted for and will make every effort possible to protect people that have an insurance policy that will protect them against pre-existing conditions. I have come forward over and over again to defend Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. My opponent votes a different way. I have worked all my time in the United States Senate on behalf of folks in the middle class, folks trying to get to the middle class, and Pennsylvania workers. It's a clear divide. You've given me the opportunity to serve as your senator. I've enjoyed working with people in Western Pennsylvania, the tremendous work that's been done in this region to recover. The people in Western Pennsylvania don't wait for the future, they invent the future. And I've been privileged to work with you, whether it's bringing jobs in terms of rebuilding infrastructure for locks and dams on our waterways, making sure that we're investing in the jobs of the future here in southwestern Pennsylvania. It's been the honor of a lifetime to serve you. I ask for your vote on Election Day.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. On behalf of all of us here at KDKA TV, thank you to the candidates, and thank you for watching this debate. Remember, Election Day is November 6th. I'm Ken Rice. Good night.
Next